And that was pretty much the best experience I've ever had. It was incredible. I don't know if I could recreate it, but thankfully you guys were there to hear my story. I appreciate it.
I'm so glad I was here to hear that.
Yeah.
And nobody else.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. It's been a great experience, this salon. We hope you'll come back and join us next time. No, it was just pre-game fun. All right, everybody. Welcome to Salon Hot Buttered Rum, the punch-drunk reading salon by Gothic Funk Press, your favorite independent and experimental publishing company based in Flint, Michigan. This right here is the third installment of our new salon series. It is our first reading of 2021. I want to thank you for joining us in the cold, or if you're somewhere else, the warm or the rain or whatever it may be. Tonight, we once again welcome three guest readers. We've got Nick Custer, Bilal Dardai, and Christine Mall-Rice, as well as our venerable guest mixologist, Irene Hodes. I want to thank our guests, and I also want to thank my lovely and talented wife, Jessica, who will be moderating this event on YouTube while we read and talk. I want to thank the staff of Gothic Funk Press, who have been busy this winter preparing books and art journals for publication, and I'll have more to say about that at the end of the event. And I also want to thank our partners with Flint Writers Incorporated for all of their help getting the word out about tonight's event. So during this event, if you have any questions for any of our readers or guests, you can go ahead and leave that as a comment on the YouTube feed, and we will come back and answer it after the readings are completed. We'll have a chance to talk about them then. I'd like to turn off the oven beeper. And now I would like to introduce our first guest. Irene Hodes is your virtual historical mixologist. She is currently the director of the Sonoma County, California Jewish and Israeli Film Festivals, coming right up online in March, so check that out. She spent over 10 years in the wine industry, making, selling, and educating people about wine. She is a writer, comedian, cook, world traveler, wordsmith, and serious crossword puzzle enthusiast. During the pandemic, she writes a popular daily film and culture newsletter, enjoys craft beer and spirits, is mastering pressure cooking for one, and has developed a newfound passion for collaging. So please welcome Irene.
Hello, everybody. Well, without further ado, I'm here to present the Hot Buttered Rum, which is the title of our salon. So thank you for allowing me to name it. And when we think hot buttered rum, we think of cold winter nights, and it is indeed a cold winter night tonight. It's snowing in parts of the country. Here in Sonoma County, it is raining, which is our winter, and that's to be expected, though we don't enjoy the flash floods we have right now. But this is a quintessentially American drink, and we think about coming together in cold nights and being warmed by our drinks. And I want to break it down. Hot buttered rum. Before we make the drink, we should learn a little bit about it because it's fascinating. So hot before buttered before rum. So hot drinks have a history of about 1,000 years or more with wine. And it is a communal drink. People would heat wine together in cauldrons and pots and come together and drink, and you can add things together, and it would warm people together and bring together community. This was especially popular in England. It's sort of seen as a hot punch. And they kept making these hot mulled wines, as we call them, or ciders, to this day, but they got real fancy in the 18th century. And we're going to see that this drink has its history in the 18th century. Look up a drink called a smoking bishop if anybody's interested. But we're going to move on to, well, you've heard of the hot toddy. Very simple. It's usually a spirit, hot water, and sugar. That's a toddy. Usually we think about whiskeys now, but it used to be just any spirit. It's a way to have a hot, quick drink in the winter. And then there's the term called grog. Grog didn't start off really as being hot. You know, sailors called their rum, and we're using rum today, rum and water, which is what they gave them in ships. You know, they paid them, they drank that. But in Central Europe, they started heating that. They would add spices and fruits. And to this day, it's known sort of as a health drink. If you're coming down with a cold, you need to coat your throat, you have a grog. Toddies, grogs, and onto butter. Butter. What drink do we know has butter in it? There are very few, if any. This is the only drink that I've ever heard of that has butter in it. But there is evidence from back in Tudor days. So a Henry VIII sort of era drink. There's a recipe from 1588 for a buttered beer. And this is where some literature comes in. J.K. Rowling and her Harry Potter series, the most popular drink is the butterbeer. And they have it cold and warm, and everybody looks forward to it. It is beloved. They love going into the Three Broomsticks and having hot buttered beer. And she did probably take a look at some historical recipes. There's a 16th and a 17th century recipe for buttered beer. And what that would involve is heating a dark beer, an ale. You put it by your fire, not on the flames because you don't want it to boil, but next to it, and heat it up really well. And separate, you would whisk together sugar and eggs and spices. And you get it sort of custardy, like how we would start any recipe with eggs and sugar. And then you temper it, you mix it back and forth, you'd whisk it so you wouldn't get scrambled eggs, you know, but it would become this beautiful frothy drink. Beer and eggs and sugar and spices together, and you'd top it off with a pat of butter. Buttered beer, butterbeer. And this will come back in a second. I find it absolutely fascinating. And now rum. This is what makes it an American drink. Rum is a quintessentially American tradition of the 18th century. And why? It's because of the colonies. And there was a sort of triumvirate thing going on. British colonies in the Caribbean. And now the British had slaves. So this is a drink that's embedded in the slave trade. Slaves, many of them growing sugar in Jamaica and all of the Caribbean islands. And the byproduct of sugar is molasses. Now that was taken up to New England, where they use that byproduct to distill spirits, and hence the rum. And so we have this triangle of sugar, slavery, molasses, rum. Rum was more common than water. The average colonial American could drink up to a pint of rum per day. This is no joke. Water was considered dangerous, and there's some evidence of that. You know, in Europe, they drink a lot of beer. The water in the Thames in London was poisonous. And people literally, they had breakfast cider. They have an alcoholic breakfast cider. Children drank this. They had beer and they had rum all the time. Tea was still really expensive. They would have it like locked in a box. We hear about those lovely tea chests. Rum was every day. You had friends over, you signed a contract with a farmer, you would sit down and you'd close the deal with rum. Everybody had a glass of rum. And so there were many, many, many recipes, cocktails that involved rum, including this one. Now, there wasn't a standard, every family had their own. And we included a recipe today, and you'll see the ingredients in the Facebook invite of very, very simple. It's sort of 1 part butter to 1 part sugar, and then you throw other things in there, right? They would make a batter, and I made a batter in advance. You're supposed to make this up to a month in advance and freeze it. You really get all the flavors together, and it's creamy, and it's a batter, so it's easy. You just take a scoop out and you add the rum and the hot water. But we're going to show you both methods today, or at least I'll show you what we did for a single cup, because it's just as easy. Let's say you just feel like a quick hot buttered rum, 1 cup. It's just a spoon of butter, a spoon of sugar, brown sugar. COVID, I have no brown sugar. I used white sugar. It's sugar. It's fine. It's recommended to use a dark rum, a Jamaican rum. I have a dark rum here, but it's spiced. Okay, it's what I have. It's delightful. And we'll make that in just a second. Now, I just wanted to toss out a theory that I have, because I learned of a recipe that I am dying to make called the flip. The flip was also a cocktail that was incredibly popular in the 18th century. This, to me, seems like a combination of a hot buttered rum and the butter beer and the flip and everything together. This was a recipe that heated the beer, just like the Tudor, just like Henry VIII's favorite winter beverage, heating the beer, whipping together eggs and sugar and spices. And then 1 step further, they added a big thing of rum. So you've got the rum, the eggs, the spice, the sugar, and then they mixed it all together and frothed it all up. Didn't add the butter, but they had the rum and the whole thing going together. So this was something that was well known in the 18th century in the Americas. As an aside, Rum that went off the menu after the American Revolution largely because we were cut off from colonial trade. And so that's when all of the grain spirits came in. And that's when beer became more popular. That's when we had whiskeys because we didn't have access to the molasses coming from the slave trade in the Caribbean. So let's make some hot buttered rum, guys. I have a pat of butter and I'm going to put it in my glass here. You should use something more like a mug. I tested this already. It didn't explode. So I'm doing it because it's clear and you can see what I'm doing. So I'm mixing, first of all, the butter. And I did warm it up a little bit in advance, a little bit too much, but better this way than a frozen block of butter. I already measured out my sugar and the spices. Now you're supposed to put in, it's to taste. It's a family recipe. I got cinnamon, nutmeg. Now many recipes call for clove. I'm a little anti-clove. Clove, if you overdo it, you can't undo it. Clove is like, it's great in moderation, but one tiny flick of the wrist too much and you've got that thing where it overwhelms your nose and your mouth goes numb. So I use allspice, and these are allspice peppercorns, which are actually geographically perfect because they come from the Caribbean. Brits call it allspice. They discovered it. They didn't discover it, but they brought it back because they thought it reminded them of nutmeg, cinnamon, and clove all mixed together. I like it. It's a bit more subtle. You can't overuse it. It's elegant. It goes in a lot of recipes in the Caribbean tradition. So I already pre-measured this. Some people like to put a pinch of salt in too, which I understand with the butter. The butter should be unsalted, by the way. I'm going to mix this together along with vanilla. Not every recipe calls for vanilla, but I like it. It really brings out an element of I don't know, elegance. It feels a little bit more like you're having vanilla ice cream. By the way, modern recipes for batter often call for vanilla ice cream and then you freeze it. Amazing. Who doesn't want ice cream in their alcohol? All right, I am going to add my rum first. A lot of people just, they throw it all together. And the reason I add the rum before the water, the hot water, is that what if you want it stronger or weaker? You can't take the water out again. So you might as well put it in after and make it as strong or weak as you like. I'm putting in 2 ounces. By the way, if you want a richer, more fattening, frothier, hot buttered rum, just use more butter. That's fine. And I measured out, this is going to scald my hand. I put in boiling water literally right before we went live. And I'm just going to do this to taste. I think I'm probably going to put in a ½ cup because a full cup to me just tastes a little bit too dilute, but then you can just play with the amounts. Okay, that's bloody perfect. You can put in whipped cream on top. You can put a bit of ice cream on top. So let this warm our hearts on this cold winter night. Enjoy some beautiful literature. Think about the history of all of this amazing drinks. You know, I'm going to throw some egg yolks with some alcohol pretty soon because I have to after having read about it all day. And back to you, Connor and Nick and Bilal and Christine. Really looking forward to your reading.
All right, thank you so much, Erin. And one of my favorite things about this Salon series is I get to try out something new, a new drink each time. And this was probably the first time I've been able to pull out the Pinkie Pie mug that my daughter got me for Christmas a couple years ago. So very excited about that opportunity. Our first guest reader tonight is Nick Custer, a Flint writer, MC, and performer whose work has been published by Rattle, Hypertext, East Village Magazine, Wax Poetry, and Belt Publishing. Custer has contributed 8 verbatim and site-specific plays, released a Juvenilia poetry book, and was awarded a Poetry Foundation Crescendo Literary Emerging Writer Fellowship in 2016. Please welcome Nick Custer.
Thank you, Connor, and thank you, everybody. It's an honor to be here amongst such strong writers and excellent historical mixologists. So I don't often contextualize my poems, but I'll just let you guys know tonight I'm going to be working backwards. So I'll be reading the newest poem first, and I'll be ending with the oldest work. This first one is kind of a wish for the new year. I wrote this in October, and thankfully I got everything I asked for. So here's the poem. 2020 was calculus, diamond tipped, like drinking gravel. So I hope your new year is soft, gauzy, marshmallow fluff instead of all that broken glass. I hope life wears kid gloves, that January is snoozed alarms, sweatpant inaugurations, cocooning comforters, and so much silk replacing itchy burlap. I hope your worst roommates are stuffed animals and pets that look like stuffed animals. That your days are cotton candy and bubble baths, shag carpeting in between your toes. I hope vaccines flow like a chocolate fountain, that guns only fire gumdrops, that body cameras can't be turned off, that suicides get spoilers and a rewind button. I hope what keeps you up at night is excess Netflix, not existential. Isn't will there finally be justice, but did Carol Baskin kill a tiger and feed it to her husband? I hope you can find hope where others see only oncoming traffic, that the mirror lies and the scale flatters, that clocks fall back every Saturday, sneaking extra hours into your adventures. I hope ominous orange skies break blue and thunder roars long before the storms arrive, that the winds bless every step you take in the right direction, and at 5:01 p.m. on a Friday, a winning ticket, tumbleweeds into your hands. So much of my work is very much poetry of place, often mixing metaphors to describe kind of the living experience of an environmental catastrophe or, whatever new scandal we have to deal with this year. But this poem is really dedicated to one of those elements in this town that helps people exercise those ghosts, helps them find closure when tragedy strikes. It's titled The Rock. Who did it first is lost to legend, or at least to me, but it's become a rite of passage, a place to mourn friends too often swallowed up without warning, leaving questions grieving can never answer, leaving only a name and half-remembered laughter, lacquered with layers of paint to hide the pain. For a flint stone, the rock is hollowed ground, a wildflower always blooming, a catalog of love and loss where hard hearts weep in aerosol, where they carve magic inscriptions turning windshields into gravestones, a sunlit stalagmite showing you the way out after you stumbled down those darkest caves within your chest. This blameless brick box we named Pandora's, caked with color and restless spirits, bearing mute witness to living La Vida Local. A man-made monolith, agoting over wilted bouquets and billboard-sized birthday cards. A relic from a community created in a hurry, for jobs that today feel like mythology, to residents unified by a history of heartache. If archaeologists could dissect the stratigraphy of our downfall, they'd split that roadside geode and unearth the soul of this city. Separate each fragile message like Dead Sea Scrolls waiting to be read, peel back layers to tell a tragic story backwards. Uprooted family trees and broken branches. A bucket of paint, hands clasped in prayer around a spray can. So this next poem's a little longer. This is from about 2018. It's in response to a famous Detroit poet, Philip Levine's classic work, What Work Is, which is a poem about standing in line, waiting for a job at the factory. It's a story of class struggle. Ultimately, it's a story of the things that you'd rather do, like sing opera, instead of wait for a meaningless job. So this is, and there's one line I just love towards the beginning of that poem where he says, "You know what work is, although you may not do it." And so that inspired this response. Work is what it is. Work is when and if you can get it. When that petitioner slinging 4 clipboards for $1 a signature can articulate why I should let the voters decide better than its author. And when the party store hustler vends a Venn diagram of fevers and chills for sweaty $20 bills through car windows, what work is non-existent. When that wealthy land developer wants you to work under the table for less than minimum wage and expects you to be grateful because you don't have to pay taxes, but also expects you to purchase your own dust masks. Or when you put the key into the ignition and pray the lucky lemon that lets you deliver pizza's Xmas Eve will get you to your destination. But also pray gangster wannabes don't get trigger happy when they rob you for initiation. What it is a form of resistance and a revelation. Captive audience forced to pay for the privilege, maxed out on tax millages. The bill still said to instill discipline. Work is wearing a sweater from October to April, keeping the thermostat just high enough so the pipes don't freeze. Short showers to save dollars. Knowing when to leave on porch lights to keep away window peekers. Some might call it an art to eke by, but it takes work to master. In fact, parking lot barbecue stands under pop-up tents employ entrepreneur chefs lounging with pockets full of ones and fives, confident in the work they invested in their secret sauce. And the neighborhood bull market that spends evenings buying stock and rib tips, white bread, aluminum foil, and extra barbecue sauce to top it off. Invisible billboards adorn nondescript houses where dealers buy gold and liberated bicycles, copper pipes, aluminum siding, weed whackers. Summer heat lines dance seductively in the street, a flash of mystery, distortion, sweat beating across the sun. High school graduates work hard as hunter-gatherers foraging for a future in shop floor ruins. A car drove through the front of the Red Ribbon Bar, a Southside dive, famous for cheap domestics, and a metal ring tied to a long string that patrons sent hurling towards a hook on a wall next to the entrance. That same spot that the car detoured through and beat the game for good, working on a gamble to snatch the ATM and winning early retirement for longtime owners. Work can involve sticking it out until the lottery tickets pay out or the sports injuries throw you a retirement party. Work is finally having the time to finish your degree at 53. Work is adults shoveling snow door to door or dragging a lawnmower down a state street, cigarette dangling from pale lips, the wind writing determination in smoke. It is work to harvest what shouldn't be left to rot on the vine. The lack of work is what it is, which is hard to improve. $1 here, a few there, a cardboard signs, elevator pitch speaking luminous volumes at highway exits, as battalions of blistered fingers dig through ashen walls, working hard for a handout, finding only newspaper clippings, warning of a Great Depression. I'm just going to take you guys a little bit further back in time, cognizant of the time here. I've just got a couple more. This is quickly a poem. It's an ode to Lowell Junior High, which is a classic defunct East Side school. Well, I remember carving jack-o'-lanterns for Halloween on the concrete stoop behind the school. Mounds of orange flesh scooped onto the grass, a pulpy model of the auto parts yard over the fence next door. Not so many years later, in need of the scrapyard part, I drive past what's left of the old Franklin Avenue business district. Craterous brick-lined puddles moldering in the rain, driving past the tall grass and blackened trees, past curb breaks leading to newfound fields of street names. Lowell, vacant for a few years now, is adorned with graffiti flourishes and boarded windows, gouged out and gruesome looking. A towering smokestack without the foliage of a furnace still stands like a petrified stump clear-cut in the forest of forgotten industries. The school's present includes its insides smashed for quick cash like a minimal resource. Education these days is less of a priority than the destructive dismantling of this aging community. And like a late November refugee from a rain-streaked Halloween, the school still stands, but sadder looking now, with the frostbitten pumpkins meatless lean. The only place this school still vibrantly exists is in its former students' photographs and memories. Even a few years can be too long for an asset to sit. And the only question anyone thinks to ask isn't how can we learn from the past, but how much long before they demolish that thing? I thought it would only be right in light of the extraordinary sentence of some and the extraordinarily light sentencing of others that I read a water poem. So this is lukewarm lead water. Well, going to get a case of water, we trudged past national news cameras filming empty brick streets and ripples in the river. Nearby neighbors a few feet away ignored in favor of classic cliches, so we laugh when they feign concern before signing off and checking their phones for something more Facebook familiar. Tired, we welcome the interest but still cringe, preferring to be low-key to notorious. Now I can half appreciate being breaking news while well-paid journalists cover our latest man-made disaster, demanding answers while cautiously staying miles away in hotels off the interstate. We both have agendas. I want new pipes and they need enough interviews to skate swiftly over the issues they're lukewarm about in the first place. When oversaturated America loses interest, I'll still be overwhelmed losing faith in politicians. Things seem so much more dire when people finally acknowledge the 2-year struggle, using the faces of Flint as 5 o'clock fodder to fill gaps between commercial breaks in the lotto. Imagine the power that comes from being victimized by power. We can make someone in another state feel like they've given back by donating a case of water. And Flint feels the love, but it's not enough. It's just a butterfly band-aid landing on a stab wound, a piece of lead painted gold and called a college fund. When we feel this earthquake's effects, our kids will be the tsunami, and no camera will still care to capture it. The destruction will be devastating and barely perceptible. We'll be left with the anger and resentment that defines us now as residents, the resilience that keeps us thinking about the future and filling our recycle bins, endangered by our environment, but still here, stubbornly digging in, still here, preparing for that next scandal to begin. We just have one more if there's time. I just want to end on a slightly up note. So again, I often mix these kind of ruin porn metaphors in what I think is a way that reveals beauty. And sometimes the beauty that it reveals is something that we don't see till after the destruction is gone, after there's a fallow field left and possibilities. And this speaks to that. It's called Sad Arson Hearts. Well, you see, I only go for girls with dry wit and sad arson hearts. The ones I date lick lips, dragging Zippo clicks across their chests, playfully threatening to go through with it. And I'm a fool. I'm a fool for that. Just some product of my environment. You see, I'm not into girls that nibble on their fingertips, determined to sit because the future's stamped with hopelessness. No, I'm down with the defiant chicks that phoenix out when faced with foreclosure or having their copper dresses stripped. I've learned not all of us can be fixed, but I'm stuck on girls that repossess their own destinies. Even if that means the whole squatting inferno, Romeo, Juliet, poison dagger thing. I've spent dizzying nights with girls who giggle about their crumbling lipstick architecture in the bitter Michigan weather, wondering if a little fire will bring them clarity. As a kid, I dreamt about fixing the derelict buildings in my Midwestern city, all of which have since been erased by fire, work crews, and misery. And nothing about CPs or girls and less about the real world. But I've known the sharp pain of heartbreak and disappointment well enough by now that it barely phases me. Sometimes it seems you have to sacrifice a house full of dreams to find your real home, even if that means setting up camp on a patch of new grass and reimagining. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. That was wonderful, and I always like hearing you read. And I realize that with with COVID, it's been a while, so it's great to have this opportunity to reconnect. Our next reader joins us from Chicago. Bilal Dardai is an award-winning playwright and performer based out of the Chicago area. He is an ensemble member of Lifeline Theater, an alumnus ensemble member of the Neo-Futurists, and a staff writer at the acclaimed audio dramas Unwell, a Midwestern Gothic mystery, publisher Heart Life, and Alba Salek's Royal Physician, Fable and Folly. Upcoming work includes a world premiere audio adaptation of Jamyang Norbu's The Mandala of Sherlock Holmes for Book It Repertory in Seattle, Washington, and a new production of the collaborative piece 45 Plays for America's First Ladies for Forward Theater in Madison, Wisconsin. Finally, Bilal is also behind an adaptation of G.K. Chesterton's The Man Who Was Thursday, and that will be available through Sordelet Inc. And I will, in a moment, comment with the link to that. But in the meantime, please give a warm welcome to Bilal.
Hi, how's it going? Thank you very much, Nick. Those were really great. Happy to follow you. I'm going to be so I'm, as Connor mentioned, I'm typically a dramatist, but it felt like it would be odd to have me sit here and talk to myself back and forth. So I have some short fiction tonight. I also have a rambunctious 9-year-old in the house. So if you hear him singing, just let's consider it experimental underscore. So the first work of short fiction I'm going to be reading is a piece called A Bibliography. The project began when I was 11. This was in June of that year, after coming home from the hospital and being forbidden from ever again hanging out with the Mosley twins, who had been so instrumental in my ascent and rapid descent from the tall maple in the backyard. I had been forbidden from spending time with them before, had even suffered injury during their foolhardy escapades before. It was not the severity of my broken leg that had finally convinced me to obey my father's edict, so much as the knowledge that as I had lay there, surrounded by torn leaves and broken branches, unable to scream for the wind knocked out of me, that they had simply run home without so much as asking if I needed help. The library books my father had brought for me during my recovery seemed to have been carefully chosen based on a meticulous calculus of his own devising. Tom Sawyer and the Three Musketeers, The Hobbit, Sherlock Holmes, books that he knew his daredevil son would enjoy, but perhaps also books that simply by being books could point out that there were safer ways to experience thrill besides searching for actual hazards. It was a noble but futile effort, and the irony of ironies there is that he never considered bringing me a copy of Don Quixote. I enjoyed the stories well enough, like the middle-achieving child in a sophomore year English class. Except, of the dozen or so works my father brought home during that first week, 7 contained dog-eared corners or left-behind bookmarks, and for whatever reason, whatever synaptic connection was occurring in my skull, these were what captured my imagination. I wondered why the previous readers had stopped in each section, if they'd run out of time and chosen not to renew, if they had decided that they were not sufficiently interested to continue. Was there significance to the page that they had meant to collect but forgot to do so before returning the book? On a lark, and out of sight of my father's certain disapproval, I carefully tore the marked pages from each book and hid them under my mattress. And that was how it began, with 7 pages from the classics of Western literature. I would read these pages like hymnals, like prayers out of the context of any god who created the universe. Soon I had gone from reading them to memorizing them, to finding places in my life where the phrases would appear, to creating opportunities to speak the sections aloud. Late at night, I would often awaken from dreams of clockwork and lay the pages out in a row in front of me, flipping them over and rearranging their order, attempting to see if there was some pattern or cogent narrative that could be formed from the absurd collision of Smog the Dragon and Injun Joe. There was not, and I became convinced that the problem was that I simply didn't have enough pages to work with. To the unsuspecting delight of my parents, I spent several hours a week in the library from then on, carefully leafing through every book in every genre in search of pages with signposts sticking out of them. When I had the money available, I would make the effort to photocopy any such pages I found. When I didn't have the money, I would make a note to come back when I did have the money. When I lacked the money or the patience, I would check out the book and then hide someplace to tear the page out for my own. When the local library ran out, I started biking 3 extra miles to the next town's library. When that library ran out, I biked 6 extra miles. By the end of the summer, after I'd begun my project, I was as lean and muscular as a prize stallion and had ravaged the collections of 8 different municipalities. I grew up. I moved away. I found cities filled with dank cellars and $20 signs on the door that read used books, and I spent the 2 hours each evening between the end of my workday and the closing of the store, rifling through weather-beaten copies of To Kill a Mockingbird, through Tropic of Cancer with the cover ripped off, and large sections stained with things I dared not imagine. But once a week, without fail, I would find something worth collecting. My Frankenstein's novel, which in fact contained no fewer than 5 different pages from 5 different copies of Frankenstein, had grown to a monstrous volume of 4,000 pages by the time I turned 30. Some of these pages I had determined to be matches, to be groups, like a part of a jigsaw puzzle the size of the world's history. Others I was certain I was close to finding the partners for. Others remained an enigma. I did not know if I'd found the book's beginning or its end. Like all labyrinths, it was but a collection of passages. On my 40th birthday, I walk into a library in Detroit while on a trip for business. I grab something off the shelf at random and sit in a chair, hoping to kill time before my meeting. On page 40 of the book, I find a bookmark made of the 40th page of another book. I unfold the page and I read it, and it reads, "The project began when I was 11. This was in June of that year, after coming home from the hospital and being forbidden from ever again hanging out with the Mosley twins, who had been so instrumental in my ascent and rapid descent from the tall maple in the backyard. In an instant, my lifelong collage is abandoned, a victim of shock and wonderment. I began scanning the shelves again, no longer looking for pieces of every book, but looking for the whole of a single book, trying to imagine who has been reading it, hoping that I have been compelling, and that whatever page is currently marked in that book is not the last page that will ever be read." And then the second piece I'm going to read is another work of fiction titled Names and Numbers of Names. Names and Numbers of Names. She consistently forgets the new girl's name. Louise knows this is bad form. Part of being hostess, after all, is having a clear and sharp memory of the staff, the regular patrons, the collegiate Asian fellows who work valet at nights to put themselves through law school. She has no reason to actively forget the new girl's name, but forget it she nonetheless does every time, as if when it enters her ear, it immediately takes a wrong turn in her brain, becoming lost forever in the dark, unmapped areas. "Check out Dr. Rott," the new girl says to Louise, stopping briefly by the podium. Louise steals a glance over her left shoulder. The new girl has not actually referred to him as Dr. Rott. This is more mischief on the part of Louise's ears, performing minor cosmetic procedures on the innocent name of Dr. Andrew Ott. His name is Ott. She had said Ott, but there now in her mind she sees him dressed in his sable cloak. Dr. Rott, master of decay, bane of the Justice League, cackling his madness on a throne of skulls and demanding the world's acquiescence. Dr. Ott, Dr. Ott, Dr. Ott. "We should do something for him," the new girl adds, right before her darting "good night" deftly extricates her from the collective pronoun. She stiff-arms the revolving door and lets it eject her into the warm spring air. Louise sees her striding down the sidewalk towards the train, fumbling in her handbag to retrieve the cigarette and smoke as much of it as possible before she reaches the platform. The new girl's name is Dawn. No. Donna. No. It definitely begins with a D. Sally. No. Louise looks back at Dr. Ott. Simple, crinkly Dr. Ott. No threat to the world, hunched at his usual table, the table he waits for patiently if it happens to be occupied when he arrives. His hair a wispy, whitening blonde, leaning like stalks of wheat trampled by a runaway thresher. The bow tie, the elbow patches, the nose, gracious, that nose, with its slope so profound it could only have been drawn by an expert draftsman. Louise thinks of his glasses, wonders how many pairs in his life have gone tobogganing straight off of that nose. It has been half an hour since he's arrived. His reservation is for 2. His hand keeps brushing against the breast pocket of his coat. He looks past Louise on her left side towards the door and then past her left side towards the bar, which is when Louise remembers. A slow night. A Tuesday, most likely. Outside the door, the world dancing uncertainly with hesitant rain. He'd come in that evening for a cocktail only, presumably after a long day of practicing whatever medicine he practiced. Louise had always suspected podiatry, but was gradually convincing herself of ear, nose, and throat. There was Dr. Ott on the bar stool, sipping a neat amber alcohol from a highball glass. There was Ramon. Yes, it would have been Ramon behind the bar. And there was that woman. The woman with the faux emerald around her neck, the woman in a dress that suggested the sultry understudy of tomorrow evening's jazz vocalist, the woman with her eyes violet and willful like snapdragons refusing to bloom. The woman who had stood from her original seat and slid into the one next to Dr. Ott with the ease of experience. That woman. That woman had occupied over an hour of his conversation, laughing robustly at what seemed like the proper moments, leaning in here, resting her fingertips on Dr. Ott's wrist there. Louise steals another glance at his table now, watches him flag down the waiter and ask to pay for his drink. His hand brushes against his breast pocket again, then passes back. His fingers dig into the pocket, pull out something small and square, drop it on the table as if something recently bled of life. Had it been any of her business, Louise might have warned him. She had seen it coming from miles away, from distances only visible through the spyglass at the top of the crow's nest, and here it had now arrived, slimy, scaly, draped in kelp. The leviathan of Dr. Ott's loneliness, rearing its head from the waters, roaring its proudly broken trumpet. Louise knew that woman well, if not that woman specifically. Louise had watched that woman drape over Dr. Ott, and she had instantly recalled Barbara. Barbara, walking in late after evenings, flitting about nonprofit fundraisers and opulent ballrooms, summoning bubbles into her personality that had never managed to survive the trip home. Barbara, who had gradually lost all facility for hiding her regret of Louise. Barbara, who broke what hearts she could just to feel the rush of such power. Barbara, who later in life had remarried to a man who had no use for her except to feel his own rush of power when he cheated. Dr. Ott stands, marches to the coat check, tips well for its safe storage. He manages to smile at Louise through the mask of his hurt and then walks out the door into the past tense. Louise walks over to his table, curious of the discarded totem. It is a matchbook, one of the restaurants, taken from the small glass decanter at the bar. She picks it up and opens it, sees written on the inside cover a name. Angela. Beneath that, a phone number. She carries it back to the podium, considering Angela and considering the possibility Dr. Ott had felt flickering in his breast pocket for hours and days. She could call, she thinks. Louise could go home in a few hours and call this phone number, wait for this Angela to answer. Louise could admonish and shame. She could speak in great detail of a crestfallen face, of the pathos of half-eaten dinner rolls. Louise could unleash a barrage of righteous indignation at this Angela, make her the proxy for every Angela, every Barbara who had ever tormented a Dr. Ott. Louise could make her sorry and then deny her apology. Louise could be every bit the villainous fiend that Dr. Ott would not be, could not be, misconceptions of his name notwithstanding. Louise could do that. The revolving door swings again and he walks back in. He steps up to Louise and clears his throat. I forgot something, he says, at the table. He looks over, sees the busser finishing up her tasks, frowns with disappointment. Louise feels her hand drawn up by invisible marionette strings, offering the matchbook back to him. His smile is small and knowing as he retrieves it and places it back within his breast pocket. He nods, thinks twice about spoken words, exits yet again. Louise considers what she thinks she knows about Dr. Ott, what she knew of Barbara, what she thinks she knows of Angela, what she thinks she knows about the human heart. She considers what she knows ever, at all, at any moment. Hannah. The new girl's name is Hannah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bilal. That was haunting and wonderful. And I think this is the first time that I've heard your fiction. So I really appreciated having a window into that. I'm looking forward to hearing and reading more. Just a reminder for any of our new guests, I see that we've got more people now than we had at the beginning. If you happen to think of any questions for our guests, go ahead and post them in the comments on YouTube. And after everybody's read, we'll circle back and do our best to answer them. Our third and final reader tonight is Christine Mall Rice. Her novel Swarm Theory was awarded an Independent Publisher Award and a National Indie Excellence Award, as well as earning an honorable mention in the Chicago Writers Association for the Book of the Year Awards. Swarm Theory also made Pank's Best Books of 2016 and was included in Powell's Books Mid-Year Roundup, the best books of 2016 so far. Oh, the best books of 2016 so far. She was included in New Cities Lit 50, Who Really Books in Chicago 2019, and named one of the 30 writers to watch by Chicago's Guild Complex. Christine's short stories have been published in Make Literary Magazine, Belt's Rust Belt Anthology, and the Literary Review, among others. Her essays, interviews, and long-form journalism have appeared in The Rumpus, McSweeney's Internet Tendency, The Big Smoke, The Millions, Chicago Tribune, Detroit's Metro Times, among other publications. Christine taught in Columbia College's Chicago Fiction Writing Department for over 20 years and is the founder and editor of the arts and culture nonprofit Hypertext Magazine and Studio. Please welcome Christine Mall Rice.
All right, well, thank you, Connor. I appreciate you including me in tonight's event. It's great to hear your voice again. Nick, it's great to see you and hear your voice again. Bilal and Aren, wonderful to meet you. And thanks for everyone for tuning in tonight, listening to some stories and some poetry and some beautiful words. And so I guess the kind of theme tonight is kind of liquid. So I'm going to stick with that. Most of you, I don't think I have to set this up too much, but this is from a new novel that I'm in progress. It's called Composite Creatures, and set in Flint and New Canaan, which is a fictional town outside of Flint that Swarm Theory was set in. So, yeah. All right. Delia sat in a circle in the dingy YWCA meeting room with other recovering addicts, pill poppers, boozers, injectors. She considered herself a card-carrying pill popper, classy, upscale. We get our meds from doctors, at first anyway, until we lie, cheat, steal to get what we need. She'd swap being a well-respected member of the community, mom, spouse, scientist, for this. Addict. Did it matter what kind? The room reeked of burnt coffee, unwashed flesh, cigarette smoke. She shifted her Doc Martens over the grimy, gouged floor. A sticky stain the shape of Texas, probably soda, attracted a fly. Flitting, landing, flitting. It reminded her of the day a few months back when she'd waded into Thread Creek, a tributary that ran into the Flint River, to do some water grabs. That big horsefly kept dive bombing her. Damn horseflies. Stung her right in the neck. She flinched and her back spasmed. It'd been doing that a lot since that botched back operation, and she'd been taking oxys to dampen the pain. She'd always joked that the horseflies and mosquitoes were the worst part of her job as a water treatment and environmental engineer. The worst part until her bosses and those snake politicians made her the fall guy, Gail, whatever. Boo-hoo, poor me, poor Delia. Stop obsessing on the past, live in the present. God, Delia, deal with it honestly, then move on. It's what the group leader repeated ad nauseum, wasn't it? As the others talked about, what was today's incredibly irritating topic? People who they trusted, people who'd failed them. Was that it? Maybe, whatever. That day, though, before her life fell apart, brilliant sky, cicadas sawing, Queen Anne's lace doing their metronome thing in the breeze, a blue heron on elegant stilt legs fished down river. PCBs in these fish, mama, she'd called to the heron. The heron remained unperturbed. She'd parked behind the New Canaan Library, walked through a meadow roasting fragrantly in the heat to a path leading to the creek. On the sandy bank, she prepared her kit for water grabs. She loved this work, loved being an environmental scientist, and this secluded spot not far from her home on the border between Flint and New Canaan was one of her favorites. Unlike other parts of Thread Creek where the bank dropped precipitously, here it sloped gently. Poplars turned inside out in the breeze, their silver undersides flashing in the sun. On weekends or after work, she, her son, and husband walked the adjacent meadow in search of milkweed for the monarch caterpillars they raised each year. Joey, nearly a man, had just celebrated his 16th birthday, turning the corner out of childhood, but still in constant motion, eternally curious. Thread Creek had been improving ever so slowly over the past few decades. Delia had been testing it, but the constant assault from development, agriculture, road salt, sewage, and dozens of other factors kept PCBs and toxins high. Not sky high, like the Flint River, she thought, already dreading the water grab she needed to do later that day before. Delia, how about you? Delia blinked. The group eyed her, expectant. The group leader raised his unibrow. Act thoughtful, remain silent, Delia told herself before requesting a moment to collect her thoughts. She'd then wait for someone else to respond so she could figure out what feeling, emotion, realization, issue, memory, fill in the blank to impart. The fluorescents hummed, casting an unflattering light over the group. The guy to her right wore a bright pink polo shirt and pressed khakis and smelled too strongly of cologne. The woman to her left kept picking at a scab on her elbow until it bled. Delia inched her chair away. The woman noticed. Think you're going to catch something, the woman smirked. That's exactly what I think, Delia wanted to say, but kept her mouth shut. Get in, get out, do what's required in group, walk briskly to her car, pop a pill or 2 or 3, depending on how many she had, get back to work, to her family. Get on with things. She'd convinced herself she didn't need group, didn't need to quit. She had this thing under control, no problem. Delia looked at the clock, still 45 minutes left. God help me, she thought. The woman next to her, the scab picker, blathered on about how her mother never approved of her hair color. Jesus, Delia wanted to say. Are you kidding me? She dyed it a different color every week. How could her mother possibly keep up? Today, a deep algae green, the color of the Flint River the day she'd taken the sample. The Flint River, poor old gal, no one looking after her, abusing her for centuries. First lumber mills, dumping industrial waste, then paper mills, carriages, automobiles, phenol from General Motors, nitrogen from slaughterhouses, a grab bag of toxins from water percolating through landfills. Discharge from the wastewater treatment plant raised coliform bacteria and ammonia levels. By the 1930s, fish suffocated downstream. A once plentiful walleye population collapsed, the water so toxic it poisoned incubating eggs. That day, though, finishing her Thread Creek water grab, she'd stopped in Sunset Hill Cemetery off Flushing Road, parked near Auntie's grave, sat in her car eating a Halo burger, sipping Verner's. She liked the spot, her car shaded by a craggy cedar, quiet save for some gossipy crows. Auntie was her father's younger sister, Delia's father, the oldest of 8. Delia's grandparents had left their small farming town in Lebanon, bound for Spring Hill, Nova Scotia, where her grandfather worked the mines. Her grandmother tended her brood and miraculously had the wherewithal to make and sell candy for extra money. After her grandfather died in a mine bump, the family sent the oldest daughter and her best friend to the US to work, save up, to bring the rest of the family over. Eventually, the entire family arrived in Flint. Anyway, Delia liked sitting here, talking to Auntie, telling her about her son, Joey, her husband, Jules, work. She'd been close to Auntie after her own mother left the family, and not being the most outgoing individual, found conversations went better with the dead than with the living. Leaving the cemetery, Delia drove the half mile to an access road that led to a small mucky bank along the Flint River. She donned her waders, tied a bandana around her face to mute the smell, but still gagged, and stepped gingerly through the black muck to the sludge-like water. A steady stream of traffic hummed on the overpass. A far-off train horn blared, but for the most part, it was quiet, save for the water's murmur. A blue jay's caw, cicadas, crickets, cabbage moths flitting. Sure, mosquitoes and flies, but good Lord, the resilience of it all. Pushing aside rafts of human feces and belly-up fish, she grabbed her samples. Looking west, the sun slanting off the water, she felt an overwhelming agitation, a combination of sadness about what had happened to the river and most likely a physical need for more pills. Reaching her car, she poured water from a gallon jug over her waders, and as she was about to store them in her plastic bin, her supervisor, Tony Jikstra, called, sounded pissed, needed neighborhood lead samples for some important meeting, ASAP. Neighborhood samples today? He sighed, just get the samples. Delia drove toward the neighborhood where she would start. She knew the residents, had been pulling samples for years, homes not far from her own around Pasadena Avenue and DuPont Street, East Village off Court, Atherton Road and Saginaw, Kersley Park, a few others. Called her contacts, let Jules and Joey know she wouldn't be home for dinner. Her portable calorimeter took lead readings of 2 to 5 parts per billion, well below the EPA's threshold. The water Flint had been pumping from Detroit had been fine for years. Why the hair on fire sampling? The next day, in the Lansing lab, she ran the Flint River water through the inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometer. As expected, it tested crazy high, 20 times the acceptable levels for polyfluoroalkyl substances, chemicals linked to cancer, hormone disruption, obesity, and immune dysfunction. No surprise. The next day, during their weekly morning briefing, Delia sat in the bland conference room at the Lansing, Michigan Department of Environmental Quality with Supervisor Jikstra and her fellow environmental engineers. Jikstra, Jik for short, seemed especially agitated that morning. With his wire-rimmed glasses, salt and pepper mustache, and sunken cheeks, he could have been a professor at MSU, but here he was, a pocket protector-wearing supervisor. With an everyone's out to get me side, Jik updated his bleary-eyed team. Delia hated these early morning meetings. Her coworkers, younger, fresher, more impressionable than her, used colored pens to color code their notes. Pulling his palm across his forehead, Jik looked out the window at gray clouds skulking over Lansing. Looks like rain. He took a sip of coffee. Got word the powers that be are going to use the Flint water processing plant to treat Flint River water. Delia stopped doodling. Her coworkers looked up. What river? Flint. For what? Someone asked. For residential. They all laughed until Jik slammed his hand on the conference table. The muscles of his jaw flickered. A vein in his temple pulsed. I'm serious, he said. Her coworkers looked at Delia. Flint was her territory. Delia shook her head as if trying to clear it. Jik, she began, you've seen the data, all of my reports from this year. That's impossible. It's untreatable. Put a match to it and it goes up in flame. Plus that Flint water plant can't treat the water. Doesn't even have the equipment. They're getting it compliant. That would cost millions, take years. Done deal. What's a done deal? Jik stood abruptly. Same time next week, people. Be safe out there, and like always added, and if you can't be safe, don't get caught. Jik scooped up his files while the other engineers, looking shell-shocked, left. I'll leave it there.
All right, thank you, Christine. And I'm going to ask all of our guests to unmute, and I'll bring everybody back for the end of the event. Yeah, thank you, Christine. It's good to be back in New Canaan. I recommend everybody check out Swarm Theory if you have not already. And it does not look like we have received any questions during this last hour, but if anybody thinks of any after the event, go ahead and leave a comment on the video, which will remain, or feel free to send me an email and I will pass it along to whoever you wish to receive it. I want to thank again all of our readers tonight, as well as Irene, for sharing their hard work. I just want to remind you that our guests all have published work available, which you can learn about on our website if you go to gothicfunkpress.com/salon. I'll leave that on the link as a comment after I sign off. And if you like what you heard tonight, please consider purchasing one of their books. Writers are small businesses. Your purchases help them pay their books, or help them pay their bills, and also probably their books. With this in mind, also, I'm very happy to announce that on February 14th, on Valentine's Day, Gothic Funk Press will be publishing A Girl Who Was His House by the poet Sarah Jean Cron. You may remember Sarah Jean from Salon Sangria last August and her poem Peaches, which was published in the Paramanu Pentaquark. A Girl Who Was His House is a collection of experimental poetry centering on themes of feminism, political agency, and madness, penned by Canadian writer Sarah Jean Cron. And that will be $14 in the United States and $18 in Canada. Our virtual launch event, moderated by writer and editor Elizabeth Blair, will be hosted at 7:30 p.m. on Mountain Time on Valentine's Day. So that's 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And please visit our website for more information on Sarah Jean's book. I want to thank again all of our writers and Irene for their wonderful work today. And it's so good to be back with you online in any form. It's good to connect, and I'm looking forward to doing so again very soon. So thank you to everybody who came out to join us.
Thanks, Connor.